Good day, Polyphony members and guests, as well as those of you who are viewing this recording at Polyphony's YouTube channel following this live session today. We're glad you can join us today as we hear from our special guest, Dr. Will Whittaker, whose presentation today is entitled Developing an Intergenerational Worship Ministry. Will is the Minister of Music at Ivy Creek Baptist Church in Buford, Georgia. He is the author of the book Cultivating Intergenerational Worship. Beyond his local church ministry at Ivy Creek Baptist, Will is a frequent teacher and clinician at worship conferences throughout the United States and is an adjunct professor of church music at Truett McConnell University and a DMA research coordinator for New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where he received the Doctor of Musical Arts degree in church music with specializations in worship and hymnology. His dissertation research focused on choral ministries in intergenerational churches. And he continues to write about his research on intergenerational worship through his blog. Will, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Welcome. It's good to be here. All right, so I'm off to the races. It's nice to meet you all. I'm going to share my screen today because I've got a presentation, and you've got a sheet that you can fill out interactively if you want to. It just kind of helps keep you engaged as we go through or whatever. But let me share my screen and we'll get started here. All right. Let me see if I can figure this out. All right. I think I got it.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right. Here we go. So I'm just going to kind of move through these slides as quickly as possible because I want to make sure that you have opportunities to ask questions as we go along. I really believe that intergenerational churches were churches that really existed prior to about 30 years ago. All of our churches were once really intergenerational up until about somewhere in the 20 to 30 year range when we started seeing churches form separate services, maybe a contemporary service or maybe a very traditional service or something that's a blended service or something to offer different types of services for their church. But at one point, all of our churches were once intergenerational. I grew up in my church. We worshiped together, all ages together. Grew up in the 80s and 90s. We had two services at my church, but we had basically one worship style, and that's how we functioned for years and years. I actually joined our adult choir when I was in high school, and actually sat next to my grandfather in our church choir and had a chance to interact with him in a different way than I normally did. And it was really cool and neat to be able to do that. And that's the kind of church that I grew up in and the kind of church that I want to see continue to develop and continue to be going forward. I really believe that is the heartbeat of where we should be as we move forward and not separating by styles and genres. I think that's really important. I wanted to define intergenerational worship for you. Intergenerational worship is an activity of intergenerational ministry that consists of persons of all ages engaged in mutual activities that are valued and understood to be equally important within the congregation. Okay. Hang on, I need to move something real quick because it's getting in the way. Okay. Intergenerational ministry and worship seek to bring together all ages in the church to serve and worship together in unity. We really believe that, and it's important that we remember that all ages are to be valued and understood to be equally important. All ages, adult ages. In our church, we actually have 5 generations in one family, and they worship together, and it's pretty cool and neat. See great-grandfathers in the church. It's just a neat thing as we do that. So you're probably asking maybe some more information about what intergenerational ministry is. Intergenerational ministry sort of kind of is the umbrella that oversees everything that even intergenerational worship kind of encompasses as well. It consists of worship, which we've talked about. So having services that have multiple ages that are in it, that are participating, that are interrelating as we do that. Also can be fellowship. There's lots of fellowship times. We did a really cool thing several years ago called the Friendship Banquet, where we partnered older adults with children's ministry, and they had a lunch together and they asked probing questions of each other. Like, for instance, they asked, what was like your favorite song growing up, and what's your favorite Bible verse, and things like that. And they had an opportunity to have intentional times to be able to fellowship together, but also to share with one another back and forth between older and younger adults. So fellowship times can be a very beneficial time for intergenerational ministry to happen, whereas they're interrelating. Mission trips, all of our mission trips at our church are intergenerational. We have kids, grandparents, parents go on mission trips. It's a great way to see them interact and have an opportunity to serve together in that way. Service, the same thing, service projects, those types of things can be intergenerational. That's always really a great thing as well. Evangelism, evangelistic efforts, the same thing. If you've got maybe teams of people that go out and maybe follow up with people who have visited your church or something to that effect, evangelism can be a great tool. And then also Bible studies. We actually have some intergenerational Bible studies in our church where we have up to 3 to 4 generations that actually go to Sunday school or Bible study or life group or whatever you call them at your church together. They actually meet together in those scenarios, and they learn the Bible and they grow together and they have interaction together. And so those are some great elements. But we're going to focus really on intergenerational worship as sort of our topic for today, because that's really what you all are doing as worship pastors, worship ministers of music, those types of things that you do as well. So we're going to focus on the worship part. So what is intergenerational worship? I believe it consists of 6 different things. And so we're just going to move through those pretty quickly. The first thing is, I believe it's an activity of intergenerational ministry, which we've already defined intergenerational ministry. So we believe that it's an activity of intergenerational ministry. It consists of persons of all ages, which we've already talked about. So this is nothing new, just reiterating. Engaged in mutual activities. They have to be doing something together. So it's not like, for instance, if you have your children's choir or your student choir or something just come and present something in your worship service, that is a multi-generational type of task. But an intergenerational task would be that they're doing that together, where you invite the children or the students to actually sing along, maybe the same anthem or the same congregational music together in mutuality. So that's really what we're looking at here as well. Everyone is valued, meaning that everyone gets a voice. Everyone has the opportunity to share, to participate, to serve together. Next thing is everyone is equally important, regardless of their age, meaning they all have a voice, things like that. This is probably nothing new to you, but I just feel like we've got to reiterate it to keep it clean. Also, in its purest form, I believe that services should be married in terms of content and style. I call it the intentionally intergenerational worship service would be services, if you have multiple services that are mirrored in terms of content and style. I actually define in my book 2 other types of intergenerational worship, which I don't really want to get too far into today, just because it kind of gets into the weeds of stuff. But there are naturally or organically or worshiping intergenerational worshiping churches that are usually smaller. And these are churches that don't have multiple types of services, primarily because they're small, but they are naturally intergenerational because it takes everybody in their small church to be able to make things happen. But they're not really necessarily intentional about what they're doing in terms of maybe showing value or really being intentional about making sure the interrelationships happen in a positive way. It just kind of happens naturally. And then there's something that I call the modified intergenerational worshiping church, which is a church that actually has multiple styles of services, but for scheduling reasons or something, they have to have different types of services. And I don't really want to get into the weeds about that, because you can read about that in my book if you get that. And there's a QR code on the last page of the sheet there if you're interested in getting that as well. But anyway, those are the three different types of worshiping services. But in its purest form, services should be mirrored in terms of content and style. At our church, we have two services, choir and orchestra are both. We do the exact same thing for both services. Nothing is different. Sermon's the same. Everything is the same personnel, same teams that worship. And that's how we stay intergenerational. Okay, so you will hear the terms multi-generational and intergenerationally used interchangeably among church leaders, but I do not believe they mean the same thing. Multi-generational just means that you have multiple generations in your worship service. And I don't really know very many churches that actually aren't multi-generational. Most churches, regardless of whether or not they have multiple styles of worship or whatever, have multiple types of ages in their worshiping service, but they may not be interrelating. Okay, so the intergenerational term means that they're doing something together in mutual activities where they're valued, where they're equally important, those types of things. They are used interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. Peter Minconi, and I put a quote down here, states that while many churches are multi-generational and seemingly healthy on the surface, in reality, the generations act like ships in the night that pass one another, but rarely have any meaningful contact and interaction. This lack of significant relations between generations must be addressed if churches are to thrive, not merely survive now and in the future. Okay, so there's the difference between those two. So we want to use the term intergenerational to mean what we mean it to mean. So I've had a lot of people ask me what the difference is, and so that's why I try to bring that up, just make sure that we're all clear that we use the correct term in the correct scenario. Okay, let's talk about some foundations as we move along into intergenerational worship again. We believe that all generations are important to God. This is kind of reiterating everything I've already said before. Somehow our churches have gotten off track a little bit in the past generation or two, though, related to this. And we've tried to say, okay, we need to bring people into our church. We need to start a contemporary service. We need to do something to draw non-church members or de-churched people back to our churches. But this is not what I think is the biblical model, which we're going to talk about here shortly. All generations are important to God. It's happening mostly in the USA. If you travel abroad, most churches in other parts of the world are naturally or intentionally intergenerational in their makeup. Every time I go somewhere, there's like one service style. What's happening in the USA is that there's this consumer mentality, and we feel like we have to have all these offerings and all these different options for people, but it's not necessarily the biblical model as we do that, as we see that. Okay, so I put Psalm 78 there. We're familiar with the next generation Bible verses in there. I'm not going to read all of those things because we want to keep moving through, but I do include some Bible verses that really support intergenerational worship as we move forward. We need to be intentional in our plan for leaving a Christ-centered legacy of faith for our next generations. This is why I believe that all of our churches should be intentionally intergenerational, which I define, or which I did define in the purest form, meaning if they had multiple services, they were mirrored. But we need to be intentional in our plan. We need to make sure that we are thinking about the types of things that we do to make interaction happen between the generations. It's very important as we do that. We also, a healthy intergenerational church is a witness to those that are in your community. I believe that if you have a church that values all ages, it's actually going to be more attractive than if, for instance, you had multiple types of services with multiple generations. I believe that it's really important that we we understand that the Acts model, as we see that when we look at Acts 2, we look at the Bible verses that says that they had all things in common and daily people were added to faith. And I think that's important as we are unified as a church. The church is unified in its purpose and its intentionality. We're going to see people come to faith. We're going to see people be drawn to our church because there's opportunities for them to be able to serve and to feel valued. So the next thing is we also believe that we need to understand our current generation so that they can learn from us and we can learn from them, and this back and forth kind of thing going on. We need to understand what's going on with our young people and the energy that they bring and the worldview that they bring is important. They need to learn from us because we have wisdom. As we are older, we have wisdom, but they have a lot to offer as well. And so it's really important that we have opportunities for interaction to happen so we can learn from each other. I really believe also that future leaders of all ages will develop more easily in the intergenerational church because there's an intentional pathway for future generations to learn. If you've got an intergenerational model where you're valuing all ages, you are investing in those, or you should be investing in those younger generations. And so future leaders have an opportunity to grow. If you're going to allow them to worship with and serve with older adults, they're going to have the opportunity to see what it's like, to be able to stand alongside, to be able to maybe use a gradual release model or some sort of way to be able to train up future leaders. I believe that the intergenerational church really speaks of that and really lends itself to being able to do that as well. An intergenerational church is positioned to respond to changing times because it values all ages. If you are have an ear to the ground for young people and what their value and their worldview is, and you're listening to them and having them be involved and have a voice, you're going to be able to respond to changing times because you're valuing all ages and not just listening to the old people and whatever. It's not going to be just the way it always is. It's going to be an opportunity for them to be able to speak into or have young people speak into what's going on, even in your worship ministry, and they're going to be able to respond appropriately. Yes. So everyone in the church, no matter their age, has something to offer God. We really believe that. We believe that that's a biblical mandate, that everyone is the priesthood of the believer, that we believe that everybody has a voice, and everyone in the church, no matter their age, has something to offer God. There's something for them in their church. And so it's very important that we have the space for them to be able to serve and to interact with various generations. God has commanded us to live in unity through the Bible, even though we live in a very diverse world. We live in a very, very diverse world, in a world that values lots of different options. But I believe that God has called us to live in unity. We have to figure out what our church voice is. So our church is a unique body. We have certain things that we do well. Your church is a certain body, certain things that you do well. You need to figure out what that is and unify your purposes. And even though you live in a diverse world, figure out what it is that you do and who you are and your voice, and live in unity. I believe that it's biblically based. I've been alluding to this throughout, but there's several scriptures right there, Psalm 145, and lots of the Psalms talk about telling to one generation to the next. Deuteronomy, investing in younger people. John 17, the high priestly prayer. Philippians 2, considering people better than yourselves, things like that. So we've got lots of biblical passages that really support the idea of worshiping together. Okay, important themes and words in Scripture. There's several words that I just highlighted there in your worksheet there. Unity, the word one. humility, the body of Christ, one generation to another, together, the family, the whole idea of being family and family worship together and being a family and having a voice. In my family, my kids have a voice, even though I am the final say about certain things, but we value the opinions of everybody in the family, and we listen to them, and we try to work together in unity and stuff like that. And I believe that's what God has commanded us through Scripture for our churches to be as well. I believe that we're going to move briefly to talk a little bit about a case for the choir, because I believe that the choir is one of the best representations of intergenerational worship that can possibly be. I believe that it mirrors what the congregation is like, and so I really believe that it's important. Kyle was telling me that most of you are choral musicians, and so choir, you either lead choir or choir is a very important part of your church. So I wanted to be sure that I talked a little bit about that. 54 million Americans, according to Chorus America, 54 million Americans regularly sing in some sort of choir, church choir, community choir, or something like that. And so that's, depending on if you look at 300 million Americans, we're looking at almost 20% of Americans sing in some sort of choir. So to say that a choir is not relevant to me doesn't make sense, because you have so many people that are regularly singing in a choir and are participating each and every week. Choirs don't always fit in every church. Does it fit in every church context? I know of a lot of intergenerational churches that are new churches, maybe new plants, and they don't have enough resources to have a choir. So it doesn't fit in every church's context. However, there are reasons that many artists are using even choirs even now on their albums. Secular artists are using choirs. Choirs are important in the church, especially if you have one. So to say that you need to get rid of it because it's not relevant, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense. The choir is biblical, very biblical. It also reflects the age diversity that's already present in your congregation. In my church, we're very fortunate that we have people of all ages in our choir. It's not just old people in our choir. We have young people. We have several generations that are in our choir, and it reflects the age diversity that's in our church. And I think that's really important as well. Another benefit is that older and younger members can learn from each other. If you have an older person that maybe is a good sight reader, good singer, sitting next to a younger member, maybe who's a developing sight reader, developing reader themselves, putting them together, putting them next to each other in choir rehearsal, maybe having them pour into one another. It's a great thing. I will never forget, I mentioned this earlier, that my grandfather and I sat next to each other. My grandfather was a great singer. He was what I call a functional music reader, where he could follow the ups and downs and basic rhythms and stuff, but he was not really a sight reader. When I was in high school, I was in choir all through middle school and high school, and so I had been learning how to sight read and was getting pretty proficient at it even then. And so I was able to pour into my grandfather by being more accurate with the pitches and the rhythms as I was singing. And he would regularly say to me, when we're together, we make a great team, because, he would be able to feed off of me. And I think that is just such a valuable illustration of what can happen when older and younger get together. It's biblical. It's a biblical approach. We've already talked a little bit about that. The all through the Old Testament, the choirs used. David instituted the choir through in Chronicles, and we believe that. We know that. We've read that. It's important. It's not something that is something we just made up. It's a biblical mandate, and so believe that it's important to do that. Having a choir will include more people and show generations working together towards our mission. They'll have opportunities to serve, to get plugged in, and all that kind of stuff. Those are important things for your church members to do. So it will include lots of people in service that have talents that the Lord has given them. Very important. The choir improves congregational singing in your church. I think everyone on this Zoom understands the importance of having that backup behind you as a worship leader, as a minister of music, as a worship pastor, whatever term you use, having the choir behind you and having the choir singing to the congregation and adding voice and volume and parts and all those types of things improves the congregational singing of your church. It does not detract from it. It actually helps it. We really believe that as well. I wanted to move to some things that when I was researching choirs in Georgia that were intergenerational, one of the questions I asked was about how to foster interaction in your choir. And so we're still talking about the choir, but I asked the question, what are things that you do to foster interaction between your choir? And these were the answers, the number one answers or the top answers that were given to me as I asked the question. They believe that it created a family atmosphere as they fostered interaction. As you're trying to create opportunities for people to learn from each other, creating a family atmosphere fosters that interaction. Also, having music ministry fellowships um, is a great way to foster interaction in your church. Seating configurations, making sure that you don't just put necessarily people. I mean, obviously, we want to put people by voice part, or if you're real, uh, uh, if you like doing maybe quartets or something like that, but you putting people that like to sit next to each other to feed off each other, having seating configurations where you are intentionally thinking about putting younger and older together, those things can foster like natural interaction between your generations. Pairing older members with younger members, that's the same kind of thing. Having a mentorship kind of mentality as you're moving forward there as well. Having corporate times of prayer. It's really a great thing to be able to hear from younger people and the types of things that they are praying for, as opposed to maybe older adults. Older adults, usually their health may not be as great and they have lots of friends that maybe have health issues. Maybe the young person has a test coming up. And so there's different types of prayer requests that go on. So sharing those, having corporate times of prayer together where you hear the needs of different generations can really help foster interaction in between your generations. It is important, and we're just going to shift gears just really quickly as we talk a little bit about valuing all, which is one of the hallmarks of intentionally intergenerational worshiping churches. I did want to say a quick word about valuing older adults in your music ministry. I do believe that it's really important that you do that. I can't tell you how many older adults in my music ministry have have come to me saying that they are so appreciative that I value them, that I still want them to participate, because there are a lot of churches in our area that were getting rid of older people in their music ministry or making them feel like they were not wanted. And so they came to our church wanting to find places to serve. And by valuing older adults in music ministry, I was able um, to create a whole segment of people that are now part of the multiple types of ages that are in our church. And it's such a great thing. Don't forget to encourage this important segment of your church. Encourage them to participate. It's easy to overlook them as well. We actually do a senior adult choir. We have that as well, but we have a lot of senior adults who sing in our main service choir as well. They do those kinds of things as well. So I did want to just kind of touch a little bit about older adults, because it's making sure that you still include them in your music ministry as well. Just a one-off little thing. I did want to mention this thing as well. Multi-generational Sundays. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. There are a lot of churches that have what they call multi-generational worshiping Sundays, where I really call it a parade of music ministry groups, where you'll see older adults, maybe the student choirs, the graded choirs will come through and sing and do a service together. But there's really not ongoing interaction. So these multi-generational services, these Sundays are okay, but I really believe that the real aim for consistent ongoing interaction in your music ministry is to have them interrelate. So actually having children or students actually even sing with your main service choir, either on occasion or all the time. So having those opportunities for them to do that, finding the space for them to participate as well is such a valuable thing. I'm not going to read them all, but I did want to touch on your sheet. I have 12 ways, and this is just 12. There's probably 100 more, but creative ideas to utilize next generations in intergenerational worship. So I wanted to kind of move and talk a little bit about next gen, making sure that you involve those next generations in your worship services. A prayer time and a worship service with multiple generations is a great way to do that. We've actually had up to 4 generations read scripture before in our worship services, where they did sort of a concert of kind of a litany of Bible verses back to back to back, reading scripture. And we had different generations in a family, actually a family that had multiple generations, having them all together. Having your students and your children participate in your main groups. Our orchestra has students in it, and so our students are involved in student ministry, but they also participate in our orchestra ministry or our choral ministry. They play, most of them are in high school, they've been playing for several years, and they can play our anthems and things like that, so they play every week, and it's a great thing for them to do that. Using all ages, maybe if you use like a frontline team or a praise team or something like that, um, having them participate as well, where you've got multiple generations on the platform at the same time. Those things are really great. Using children or students to do vocal solos, if you have time in your worship services for vocal solos. Using children and students on tech teams, those are really important. Tech teams are a great way to get young people involved because they understand technology even better sometimes than older adults or adults. So developing mentor relationships, making sure that you have opportunities for them to pour, have older people be able to pour into younger people, stuff like that. Using students or children to be ushers or greeters or worship assistants for the Lord's Supper or taking the offering. Those types of things are very great and creative ways to involve next generations in worship. So we're gonna once I get done here in just a little bit, just in the next few minutes, we'll have opportunity maybe for you if you've got things that you have done that or creative that you want to add to this list. That would be super great. I'd love to hear some of those as well. Choosing congregational songs. So we just want to briefly touch on this a little bit. I really believe that choosing congregational songs, really, this could be done in any type of church, but in the intergenerational church, it's very important that you consider all ages in your church. So because of that, it's very important that you choose songs that are theologically and doctrinally rich. I believe that it doesn't really matter what church you're in. This is really important that you are theologically and doctrinally rich. But I don't think that we need to sell ourselves short, that children can't understand some of these theological concepts if they're explained. And so I think that we need to find stuff that's definitely very rich in text, that marries where the text and the music are married together and work together really well. Those are very important. We also need to consider the direction of the lyric. And by that, I mean, is it a song that is sung to God, where we use the pronouns like you are worthy or something like that? Consider the direction of the lyric, making sure that we have songs that we balance songs that are also horizontal in nature, where we're singing to one another. Well, a great example of a great horizontal worshiping song would be like To God Be the Glory, where you're admonishing each other to praise the Lord, and not singing directly to God in a vertical way, which there's lots of vertical songs out there, but making sure that you balance that with some horizontal songs that where people are admonishing as you're singing to one another, and encouraging them to participate in worship or some act of worship as you're doing that. We also need to consider the view of God. The transcendent versus immanent view. Transcendent would be like the holy God. He's the king, he's sovereign, making sure that you focus on the qualities of God where he is transcendent, but also the immanence of God, that God with us, that Emmanuel, the nearness of God, the attributes of Jesus being our friend, or becoming human or becoming flesh, as well. So we need to balance our view of God, making sure that we have opportunities for both, that we have a high king view of God, but also that we balance it with immanent songs. A lot of newer worshiping songs are very immanent in nature, and so you want to make sure that not too many of your songs are immanent in worship, or have a whole worship service where everything is focusing on the immanent qualities of God. Um, I really believe that you need to have balanced pronoun use. We need to use the words we and us more than just I and me. So looking for songs that use the pronouns me, not using the words, bleh, excuse me, not using the pronouns me and I as much, but using pronouns we and us even more. I also think this is the key point that I really wanted to bring out. In select congregational songs, always aim for familiarity. I believe that familiarity is really important. Familiarity can be taught. I believe that it can be taught. Um, I believe that a new song can become familiar, but familiarity is really important. I believe every service should have at least one familiar song to everybody. So one of the things that I try to aim to do, as long as considering all these other attributes of choosing congregational song, is I'm always looking for familiarity. I'm looking, is that older person going to have some familiarity with the song that's in our worship service? And what about our young person as well? So for our church, we have a balanced approach. We do contemporary music as well as traditional music, contemporary hymns, contemporary worship songs, as well as time-honored hymnody as well. So we do a balance of all those types of things, because I'm looking for songs that are going to reach multiple generations. But most important to me is familiarity, that we are focusing on familiarity as that is an important thing. One things that I wanted to do, but it was a closing thoughts, and you may not have this scenario, so I'm just going to move through it pretty quickly. Um, I encounter lots of churches that have multiple types of worship services in their church, and they want to bring their churches together. They're looking for opportunities, or they're looking for a way to bring their churches back under one worship umbrella. And so they've asked me, what do I think about that? And what kind of process can we go through to do that? And so I interviewed several churches that actually have gone through this process of coming back together after having multiple styles of worship services. And these are the things that I found out. So I wanted to close with some of these, and then wanted to give you another list of some intentionally intergenerational things you could do in your worship ministry, and then field some questions. That would be great. First thing you can do is as you're trying to bring multiple worship styles back together, is to pray. It's very important that you use prayer all the way through, that you're seeking the Lord's guidance for your church as you're trying to figure out all of the different aspects and all the different logistical things that have to be considered as you consider coming back together. It must be senior pastor led or lead pastor led. If your senior pastor is not on board, it's not going to happen probably in your worship service. So it's very important that you have the okay of the senior pastor. It really needs to be on his or her heart, depending on whatever your context is. It really needs to be something that they are leading, that they are actually believing to be a biblical approach. If you are bringing worship services back together, you need to use players and singers from both services. So that you need to have this bringing together of the worship teams as you do that. Maybe you used a worship band in one service, and then you have the choir. Using some of those players and singers from maybe that contemporary service, if you're coming back to a more balanced a blended approach, do that. Use common songs, use common set list, things that you already know together. There's probably undoubtedly things that you already both know. Use common set lists as you do that. Reintroduce and introduce new songs very slowly. Make sure that you are being very painstakingly slow as you do that, because you want to make sure that you don't throw anybody off the train, so to speak. Don't try to be like everyone else. Focus on what makes your church unique. I think this is really an important thing, regardless of whether or not you considering coming back to multiple worship styles. Every church is unique and has certain things that they do well. We focus on choir and orchestra at our church because that's what the kinds of talent and the types of things that we have. That's what makes our church a little bit unique, because a lot of churches in our area are very, very contemporary. We're in suburban Atlanta, and so we have a lot of churches that are very contemporary in their nature. But what makes our church unique is that we're very choir and orchestra driven. And so we're trying not to be like these other churches. We're trying to figure out what it is that we do well, and that's what we want to focus on. That's what we do. You need to consider all the pragmatic issues that you have in your church. Is scheduling is going to affect Bible study. What's going to happen if we bring all these things? I could sit for the next 20 minutes and tell you all the practical things that you could probably think of, but you need to go through all the pragmatic issues. Take your time. Most churches that I talked to took a year to bring that back under one umbrella. It took a year of planning and praying and beginning that process as they did that. Also, work together as a team. It's really important that you're working together as you're bringing those two teams together, not only integrating them as well, but trying to remember that unified approach as you consider the different aspects that are happening in each of your worship services. So those are just some things that are there as you're considering maybe coming back together under one roof. And then I just wanted to end real briefly with, well, I've got 25 things, ways to be more intentionally intergenerational worship. I'm a list guy. I love lists. And there's just so many different things that you can do. I don't want to bore you by reading all of them, but I just wanted to highlight a few. One of the things that we started doing is we use an intergenerational worship team, a worship planning team. So I have regularly meet with people of all generations where we're planning things for worship ministry, like the types of things that we're going to do, maybe the congregational songs we're going to sing, actually having them be a part, having young people have a voice in what goes on in worship ministry. And that's a great way. Using mentorships, having those types of things, treating your worship ministry like family, celebrating the overly talented and the marginally talented, having opportunities like the choir or even like the orchestra, where people who have a little bit of talent can find a place to serve alongside people who maybe have a lot of talent. In churches where there's only the uber professional people that are on the platform, you don't have the opportunity to train up new people. So we want to do that as well. Using students, using children in there. I believe children's sermons are a great way to have an intergenerational kind of approach to your worship services if you do that. I think it's important to use a model like the gradual release model, which I talk about in my book, to invest in future worship leadership, which basically talks about slowly giving leadership or handing over leadership to people that are emerging leaders by doing it together and then gradually releasing that so that they actually become the leader as it's there. We talk about that at length in my book there. And so lots of different things. The list is there. Feel free to read through all those things, things that you want to add, that kind of thing. I would love to hear what you have to add as well. I did want to mention this book. There's a QR code on that sheet. If you're interested in the book, you can order it from the publisher. where you can scan the QR code right now. I would love for you to get a copy of that if you want to. Talks a lot about some of the things that we talked about today, but also a lot more, goes into depth and in greater detail, that talks a lot more about worship ministries or whatever. So that's really all that I have. I'm interested in hearing from you. I don't know if there was questions in chat, or if there's questions that you have for me, or things that you want me to revisit or whatever. I know we've got about 13 minutes or whatever, but I'm happy to talk about whatever.
Will, thank you for covering all the ground I asked you in preparing this presentation to cover. I thank you, because I knew that this grouping of people here live, and also those who will watch this later, are choral musicians primarily. A lot of us, all of us, I think the common denominator is in our worship services, we have traditional contemporary models going on, and also choral music in different ways, or different ensembles. Right. So thank you for covering all that. This is excellent. Questions, feedback, thoughts you've had, group. We'd love to have interaction here. How many of you have student choirs still, like Will does at his church at Ivy Creek? Yeah. Senior adult choirs? Yeah. And are there ways that you utilize those in y'all's contexts, intergenerationally or multi-generationally still? Because there is the definition. I appreciate, Will, you stressing the difference, and that they're not interchangeable words, multi-generational, intergenerational. That's very important for us to really think about how we value the intergenerational ministries that we should foster more.
I'm actually I'm the interim minister of music at Oakland Baptist Church in Rock Hill. So what I'm about to say is less philosophical or biblical and more practical, in the sense that I don't direct the youth choir, and last year it was one of those years where the youth choir graduated a lot of seniors, and so this year's youth choir is a bit weaker. And I was talking with the volunteer director, and we made a strategic decision that the special Christmas music would be a combined adult youth venture.
Love it.
What that meant, though, was I wasn't able to choose a work that's quite as difficult technically, nor quite as long, but I was happy to, I guess in some ways pull in the fence post a little bit to make it achievable for students. And even though I'm in an interim role, that has been a really fun thing to see. We've done adult and youth combined rehearsals already to get ready for this. And then we're actually doing Karen Moroli's new little work, Light of Peace, Celtic Carols for Christmas. And it really is very accessible in terms of the ranges. And it's the instrumentation is fiddle, flute, and Irish drum. So you really get that Celtic flair and some beautiful old Scottish and Irish melodies. I think it's going to be a really neat thing, but I'm really looking forward to just the visual impact of seeing students mixed with adults, and that's really cool. So this was kind of necessity is the mother of invention sometimes, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great.
And the opportunities just for fostering interaction that just happen naturally in those rehearsal times. There's people get curious about the people they're sitting next to, and having conversations and getting to know those young people, having opportunities to ask the older people questions or whatever. And so you can actually have probing questions for them at occasion. Maybe take an opportunity to get them to ask questions about that would give them an opportunity to find out more about each other. you could. It'd be cool.
Very good.
We've done kind of the same thing, Doug. We open up our Christmas program to anyone essentially in the church that may not have time to be in the adult choir regularly, but also open it up to youth choir. So youth choir meets at 6, adult choir meets at 7, and from 7 to 7:45 we do our Christmas program music only, and then 7:45 to 8:30 we move on. Also, that's one of the challenges I think with an intergenerational choir is timing. Because the adults can stay later, but with the kids they got to get home.
Well,
And the sorry, Will.
no, I was just going to say the number one, when I've had conversations with colleagues about opportunities for different generations to interact, scheduling issues is the number one thing I hear every single time. It's like, we want to be intergenerational, we want to have opportunities for them to go, but we have major scheduling. Student ministry is not willing to give up their students at certain times, and we have all these things. So that is the number one battle that we face, which is why I really believe senior pastor led, that whole idea of the senior pastor being on board with the fact that it has to be intergenerational really feeds that, because he can or she can kind of feed that opportunity for scheduling changes or finding some overlap somewhere. So it's got to be on their heart as well.
And so for our youth that participate in adult choir, that the few that continue and stay over, they love it because they get so many compliments from the adults.
Sure.
And it really nurtures them and feeds them. It is funny you talk about scheduling. I just saw a reel the other day of what it was like being a kid growing up in the 90s. And the parents were saying, oh, you're going to go to your friend's house? Okay, well, just make sure you're home before supper. And then it said now, and it says, hurry up and get your cleats. We have to go drop your sister off for dance in 5 minutes. Then we're taking you to the soccer game. Then after that, we're doing this, and we'll try to fit supper in there somewhere. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so true.
Yes. Yeah, there's no day. Sundays and Wednesday nights are no longer sacred for any of us. Other questions or feedback? I think about things that happen. We've talked about this as a staff and as among our volunteers here at Kirkwood, that where else do generations meet together? All generations every week, really steadily. Like Wednesday nights, a few Wednesday nights ago, one of our pastor's youngest daughters in 8th grade, and he was doing prayer meeting, Bible study one Wednesday night, and she's doing her homework because youth do their activities on Sunday evenings. Speaking of schedules, we don't have youth activities on Wednesday nights here, only adults and ensembles, music ensembles, that sort of thing. And all our youth music, children's music, and activities are on Sunday evenings. That just works here in St. Louis at Kirkwood. But our pastor's daughter was doing her homework in the lobby, and about 5 adults are coming in for choir rehearsal, and they're helping her with her math homework.
Love it.
And now, how often does that happen? On a Wednesday night, middle of the week, where else is that happening in the world?
And a lot of times, I was just going to say, and young people can really help older people with technology, figuring out things with their phones. My kids regularly help their grandmother out on which apps to get and download and things like that. There's just things that we all offer based on our age and what we're good at, so to speak, that we need to be using to invest in each other, love each other, and be a family together.
Exactly. At Thanksgiving during the holidays, this is something I think we can be intentional about too when we're approaching. This is October when we're having this meeting, obviously. I'm saying that for the recording purposes. But as we're approaching November and December, the students that are coming back for college, the freshmen in college and sophomores, what I've seen happen here at Kirkwood is I'll see interactions as a newcomer. I don't know some of these college students, but what has struck me the last few years is I'll see some of these young people come back, or they're in their 30s, and they're interacting with these much older people that are not family, that it seems like they're family because these people adopted them years ago, so to speak, in the church, and they want to have this interaction with them. It's beautiful. And I think, oh my goodness, again, where else is this happening? And so how do we incorporate our college students that are coming back during the holidays in worship is another thought, just to throw in the creative list of Will's wonderful ideas there. Yeah.
I would really love to see a case study of churches that cultivate intergenerational life and churches that segregate students from, well, you could name it. You could list it, worship, like, so our church doesn't allow, we say don't allow, we have children's worship up through 5th grade. And then all of a sudden they're just supposed to hop into worship starting at 6th grade, but then you've got, 5 to 6 plus years of a worship style that's completely different than everything they've experienced. And then all of a sudden they're in a completely different space without any transition period. So I would love to see what impact that has on future generations as to whether they stay in the church, how they're part of worship, all of those things. It would be really fascinating.
There have been some studies that have talked about kids that are involved. So there's a book called Sticky Faith that's out there. Kara Powell and some, I can't remember the name right now. It's evading me for some reason. Kara Powell is one of the authors. But they talk about how kids that are connected, that are serving, that are actually involved in their churches have a stickier faith when they get to college and beyond than those that were just consumers. So that research has been done there. So they're
Did
very.
You say,
what?
Pardon me, Will. Did you say Carol Powell? Did I catch
Kara?
Kara. Thank you.
Yes. I think something just went into the chat.
Okay. Yes, Ryan's good at sharing stuff like that.
Chair
Yes,
Powell
thank you.
and Chat Park.
I was trying to get the chap out of my head, off my tongue, but I couldn't.
Thank you.
It's a good book, and they have newer books than that as well that they've written that kind of continue their research as they go through that. But it's great for student ministers to read those books for sure.
Thank you.
So we are incorporating our youth. This Sunday is sort of Youth Sunday for us. We're incorporating youth that are going to be leading worship completely. Student choirs leading, youth praise team is leading, and they're all doing everything for the worship service. And actually, one of our children's choirs is singing as well. So we just do regularly have opportunities. A couple of weeks ago, our senior adult choir led in worship. They were the main service choir. Again, just finding opportunities for them to feel valued. Still more of a multi-generational approach because we still do plenty of intergenerational things, but still just making sure that these people have opportunities to serve and feel valued and feel like they're a part of something. And the senior adults just love getting an opportunity to serve and to use their gifts. And so it went really well. So.
Our children are singing this Sunday in worship and doing some other things, and they sang last month too. We're trying to put them in once a month. That's the goal, at least the aim. And they last month, I thought we hadn't done it in a while, and I thought it's like when we all plan something on paper, we go, oh, this should be really good, but then it happens. It's in flesh. And in worship, a child leading a call to worship last month, I knew it was going to happen, but as soon as the child started speaking, it just kind of gripped me. I was like hearing the words for the first time. Almost. It was like that. Like, oh my gosh, if they're just reading scripture or stuff, like not just musically, how do we engage them, but other ways too. Yeah. Thank you. Well, this has been excellent, great, and our time is already, the hour has gone by quickly. With it, something that we're all concerned about and invested in. Will, thank you for preparing this today and for your work here. Everyone, I encourage you to get this in your library if you can, in this in your reading list, and to engage with it, engage in this topic in that way all the more. And speaking of generations, I have been sharing this. I'm going to, oh, well, first of all, let's have an announcement before I go to benediction from our Doug Haney.
Yeah, happy to do that. Again, Will, thank you so much. Just a great session. We really appreciate your wisdom in all these matters. Just very quickly, I don't do this often, but I did want to alert you to a couple of videos that we've dropped recently. You know, in our Polyphony community, one of the things we're interested in is how you flourish in all the aspects of your life and work. And one of the things that our research shows is that we flourish best when we're in positive, productive relationships with staff people in our system, especially our senior pastor. And so, almost tongue in cheek, we titled a couple of recent videos, "Why Can't We Be Friends? Positive, Productive Pastor Church Musician Relationships." Those videos are now on our YouTube channel and on our website. They're really engaging, and it's at times lighthearted conversations between me and some pastor friends of mine, but I think they really will at least point us in the right direction of how we can do better in terms of these really, really critical relationships with, well, our bosses, our supervisors. Yeah. And then our conference, just hope you've got the dates penciled in. Hope you're planning to be a part of that. Thursday through Saturday, February 6th through 8th, Smoke Rise Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Some wonderful presenters already booked. You can find out more about it on our website. Don Saliers, who retired from Emory University, will be with us. A young choral clinician, Meg Granum-Gerchif, who is at Johns Creek United Methodist Church in Alpharetta, just in the last couple of years got her DMA at University of Kentucky. She's an incredible church musician and will be speaking to us about, you know, choral artistry. And speaking of that, the theme of our conference is the artist heart. The artist heart is the theme of our conference this year. So I hope you'll check that out. Hope you'll register soon. Thursday through Saturday, February 6th through 8th, 2025. That's it.
Thank you, Doug. Again, thank you, Will, and all. It's good to see all of you and have this time together. I close with a benediction that I've shared all throughout this year, at least, from mentor and professor, retired professor at Baylor University and Truett Seminary, Terry York, that many of you know. A benediction for church musicians. And now to you who have been called to sing amid the shouts and cries and slogans, to you who have been called to sing love to hearts full of hate, to sing truth in the cacophony of falsehood, to sing community in the barren places of isolation, to sing peace in the midst of deadly conflict, to sing embrace in the midst of denial. To you, musicians of the song of grace, may God grant always yet another song of courage to be hummed until God's words appear at the time of testing. Amen. Breathe, bless, and be well. Polyphony.